Can somebody explain to me, because I admit I've wrestled with this as long as I've studied Christianity. In the beginning was the Word. I've never fully understood that, especially if it harkens back to Genesis. I don't have an issue with it. Please understand, this is truly a question from ignorance. Is the Word, when God said, let there be light, is that the Word that's being referred to?
To some extent, yes. The idea is to say, I think this is ultimately the Christian understanding, is to say that the God speaking is not created. When God speaks, it's not something else than Him. It is in some ways separate from Him, but also God. This is coming to love that Bishop Barron was going to talk about. That God speaking is His own being that is speaking into the world.
And you would understand this in the Genesis context, is that there's an insistence on something like the primacy of the process that extracts the order that's good out of potential and chaos. And that's the Word. And the Christian insistence is that Christ embodies the pattern of loving sacrifice that characterizes that Word. And so that idea is something like the foundation of existence itself is the spirit of loving sacrifice. And that's equivalent. It's the same thing as the Word that extracts the order that's good out of potential at the beginning of time. And one way of understanding that more prosaically, I would say, is that imagine the order that you establish in your family. If that little microcosm of the walled garden, your family, to the degree that you embody the spirit of loving sacrifice as a father, then you'll create out of the potential that's your family relationships, the order that's good. And it's sacrifice because, well, that's what you do on behalf of your children, right? You put them first, not you. You certainly put them first before your whims. You put what's best for them before their whims too. And so there's an upward aim in that, and all that upward aim is sacrificial. And then, well, then we get to the issue of what constitutes the ultimate sacrifice, which is partly what's explored in the gospel accounts. It's obviously explored in Abraham, because Abraham is called upon to make an ultimate sacrifice. But this is an extension in a different direction. Christ is a master at using short, mysterious stories. They change the listener who takes them seriously.
The person that you do not think could ever be virtuous, well, let me show you, this is the person who is fulfilling the law and the prophets.
I don't believe in that promise. I'll just be honest on this point.
Then it hit me. I saw it.
This Jew is very frightened of a post-Christian society.
The power of love.
I don't want to be in a Hallmark card, I tell you.
We've got our work cut out for us, gentlemen. I sure hope we're up to the task.
One thing I would say in response to your question is the Logos being talked about here is the interior word of the Father. So the word of creation is more of a word that goes out. But within the Godhead itself, there's an interior word. The Father has an imago of Himself that we call the Son. The Father and Son fall in love with each other. The mutual love is the Holy Spirit. So we would see from the beginning, this very text, there's a Trinitarian overtone. But it's the word that, in a way, precedes the word of creation. It's interior to God Himself. So the Word was God, as it says.
May I just add to that in terms of the text? There are two words here that are very difficult to translate into English. And one, of course, is logos, which can mean, obviously, word, proposition, meaning, story. I mean, the resonance of that word is very rich. But also the word that's translated as beginning, the arche, because in the Greek philosophical tradition, that word is used for God. So, and there are reasons why this should be the case, but the arche is a term which has a very powerful theological meaning within the Greek philosophical tradition. It's the first principle. It's the source of all reality. So one way of looking at this is to say, well, in the source, there was the Word. I.e., to say the Trinitarian reading, although that sounds like an absurd Christian introjection of a much later period, you could see that as making perfect sense with just these initial words.
John.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the fact that there's actually
I call them the 4 L's about God. There's love, agape, there's logos, there's light, and life. And these are all the identity claims that are somehow circling. And I'd like to propose we slow down a little bit, because the familiarity of those terms to us, I think, is masking something more profound going on here. And if we think about all of these, they're pointing, well, to me, they're pointing to something very radical here. They're asking us to get out of a normal way in which we think about reality in terms of stable, substantial, independently existing objects. All of these are inherently relational realities. And think about how profound that is, to say that ultimate reality is inherently, ultimately relational, and that therefore a relationship to it has to be primordially a relational thing. And this is very, very hard for our way of thinking, because we have got into the mode, and for all kinds of historical reasons we don't need, of thinking of, and of that what there really is are individual things. There's no relationality. This is, of course, nominalism. All of that's in our head, and then that gives us a dualism, because the mind has the patterns, the world. There's something going on here in this language, and I want to slow down a little bit and get at, right? These terms are very familiar, and I think I understand why they're there, but their familiarity is actually in some sense problematic, because I think it's easy, like these are all nouns, and it's easy to think we're talking about 4 things. These are attempts to disclose, and all 4 of them, I feel they're playing off against each other. The relation between them is as important as any one of them. And all of them are playing off against each other and trying to call us into a new way of trying to relate to ultimate reality. And so, like when I try and, because Jesus makes these claims too. He talks about, I'm the light of the world, abundant life, all of it. And this to me, if I could hear these words again, I could get to a place where I think the idea of could have more real relevance to me. And so we live in metaphor. Metaphors aren't façon de parler. Like we've just begun, but I hope this discourse isn't too hard, but I hope we understand it. I hope you see my point. I hope you get what I'm saying. Like, try and say anything, right? Metaphor is not an ornament. It is part of the fundamental grammar of our cognition. And these are more than metaphors. These are metaphors that are trying to transcend themselves, and they're trying to point. And I'd like to also, I'd like to try and make sure we're not only paying attention to the text, we're paying attention to what is the mental framing, I'm trying to use that we're bringing to this text. I want this text to challenge me, and I assume that's what everybody is doing here. And so what is our stance, our orientation towards it, such that we can be appropriate to it, so we can really listen to it very deeply?
It seems to me that what John is establishing extending a radically non-materialist axiom. He's trying to identify what the core phenomenon of being is. And it's in this story, it's not material. It's being itself. It's very fundamentally associated, I think, with what modern people would call consciousness, which is a complete opaque mystery in and of itself, right? John is attempting to characterize the spirit of being itself. And he's making a claim. The claim is it's embodied in Christ. It's the same as the divine principle that generated order at the beginning of time. It's apprehensible, it's foundational, and it's also the fullest expression. This isn't directly in this text, but it emerges. It's the fullest expression of the tradition that's made manifest in the Old Testament. And it emerges out of our primordial stories and announces itself as the principle of being itself. And it seems to me irrefutable that the principle of sacrifice is the basis of sophisticated psychological integrity and community. I just can't see how that cannot be true. And that's being pointed to here as well. Sacrificial love, it's something like that.
But for sure, the light, the life, and the word, they are things that make other things exist, in the sense that light is that which makes things seen, life is that which makes things move, and word is meaning that makes things happen. And so you can see that the analogies that John is putting together are there to say, like, if you don't understand what the word logos is, then light will bring you a little further. And if you don't know what light is, then life will bring you a little further. And like you said, it's not that one of those is actually describing anything, is that all of them playing with each other are pointing you to the mystery of the notion that there are invisible movers that make things move or make things happen, make things exist.
I think that's helpful. But what I'm saying is, like, think about what we're saying here. Imagine going into a room of physicists and saying ultimate reality is love, light, logos, life, right? They're going to look at you and they'll either, well, that's very nice. It's a platitude, and they don't really believe it, right?
But they act it out in their life.
They should.
But that's the point I want to make. But these things are not, they're not out there metaphors. You can't do science without these principles of intelligibility, right? They're right. And so I'm trying to wake us back up to. It's John's not making a scientific claim. I'm not saying that. That's ridiculous. But he's not saying something that's irrelevant to the scientific world.
He's making a meta-scientific claim.
Yes.
Right.
Thanks, James. That's exactly. And also, this can be easily trivialized. That's my concern here. This can be. Oh yes, that's very nice. Light. Yeah, light, love. Oh, we like love, right? This, like, imagine proposing that relationality is that from which things emerge, rather than things are that from which relations emerge.
Can I just jump in? I completely agree with what you're saying. And you're very close to Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. He said Trinitarian doctrine turned upside down the classical view. It said substance is primordial, relationship is accidental. Just the opposite. Ultimate reality is a relationship, hence the importance of in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And take the next step. Aquinas says this, that a creature is he says, quaedam relatio. It's a kind of relationship to the Creator. It has to be. If it's coming into being every moment from nothing, the creature is a relationship. Then I'd link it to Jesus' ethical teaching. Why do you love even your enemies? Because it's not so much substance against substance, but all of us are, whether we like it or not, connected to each other through God. So I think that's really an absolutely right intuition. And it's the metaphysics of this opening line.
I think it dovetails, too, within space and time. It's very interesting, Douglas, you said that the word for beginning is God, right? And so this goes into, John, the discussion of, well, what is a cup, right? A cup it's designed for a certain purpose. It is also the purpose, and the end of it is also what it's intended to be. And so there's a circularity too. In God was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That temporally, this is that same fractal thing that's also being expanded across time and space. That the meaning is embedded in the object as it exists, what its use is and what its end is are all simultaneous.